Hey there, Pastor Marc here. It's our prayer that this message would encourage and equip you in your relationship with Jesus. We're able to provide this content due to the joyful generosity of our financial partners. And if you'd be willing to join that tribe and help get some sermons like this around the world, you can donate at harvestbaptist.info/give. God bless. Romans chapter number 7. I'm going to start with a little bit of a story. When I was growing up, I lived in two different houses up until first grade. I was born up until first grade, this house in Louisville, Kentucky. And then in first grade, my parents built a home, and we moved about 10 minutes away, right across the river in southern Indiana, actually. And we lived there till I left and went to college. And in our first home, when I was a little guy, we had a neighbor. Her name was Miss Debbie, at least that's what we called her. And Miss Debbie was about 10 years older than my parents. Her youngest child was a smidge older than my mom's oldest child, my oldest sibling. And we went to church together with Miss Debbie and Mr. Ken. But she would watch us occasionally when Mom would maybe have a grocery run that she needed to make by herself or whatever. And we'd go over to Miss Debbie's house. And there's two things I remember about her house. One was it's the only house I've ever seen that was decorated in frogs. Miss Debbie loved frogs, and her husband didn't mind. And the house was, just covered with frog decor, like from head to toe. There were frog statues and figurines and fountains and blankets and crocheted things and paintings on the wall. It was just frogs upon frogs upon frogs. And as a kid, we loved it. We thought it was so cool. Now I'm not sure what to think. Actually, I do know what to think, but I don't love it anymore. But as a kid, we loved it. But Miss Debbie played dominoes. That was like her game of choice. When we would go over to her house, we'd play dominoes. So much so, we'd play that it became, even when she wasn't babysitting us, I'd ask my mom, can I go over to Miss Debbie's and play dominoes with her? Like she was, my friend. And I would just go over there, knock on her door, and we'd play a couple of games of dominoes, and I'd go home. And, I'm 5 or 6 years old, just loving that. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about dominoes this week. And I don't know how many times you see someone playing dominoes any longer. More or less, when I see dominoes now, it's no longer the game where you're matching 6 to 6 and such, but it's more of people setting them up. And they're setting them up like in rows or in shapes or in colors. And there's these really extravagant videos you can watch of 10, 20, 50, 80,000 dominoes all being set up and all falling. And they're really cool. I'm sure it takes people a tremendous amount of time to set them up and for them to all topple over. But from that has become the phrase domino effect. And Romans 7 is this depiction of a domino effect that happens in our lives that you need to be aware of, and then in turn it tells you what you need to do about it. And the domino effect that it describes to you is first the domino of death. Actually, I guess I should say last, but Pete helped me make these, and thank you, Pete, for helping me make these. There's this domino of death. I just broke it. We know that death isn't all by itself. We know that actually sin is the thing that dominoes into death. That sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. That the wages of sin is death. That the soul that sinneth, you guys over there can see it too, it shall surely die, right? Sin dominoes into death. See, it falls over every time. Then there's law, all right? Law is this thing, according to Romans 7, and this is kind of the core of Romans 7, that dominoes into sin. Now, this presents some really interesting questions, because if you were to take death and categorize death as good or bad, two options, good or bad, which option is death? I'll count to 3 and you tell me. Is death good or bad? 1, 2, 3. I heard some of both. It's bad. Death's not fun. Death is an enemy for the Christian. We celebrate that Jesus defeats death in the resurrection because death is our enemy. It's not our friend. The people that are like, well, death is just a natural part of life. It's just you as a cosmic drop going back into the cosmic ocean. And they try to make death okay. All you're doing is putting lipstick on a skeleton. We don't like death. We don't like funerals. Death is not our friend. It's not. Now, sin, you tell me, good or bad, on the count of three. Is sin good or bad? 1, 2, 3. You see, you guys ignore the instructions. You're supposed to wait till 3. Bad, though. You got it. You passed the test. It's bad. Sin's not good. So it would make sense that bad sin dominoes into bad death. Now, the law. Is the law good or bad? Same test. Count of 3. Good or bad law? 1, 2. Eager beaver over there. 1, 2, 3. All right, the majority were good. You're right. The law is good. So how is the law, it's good, perfect even? How does this good thing produce a bad thing like sin? I understand how a bad thing like sin produces a bad thing like death. But how does a good thing like law, the law of God, produce a bad thing like sin? Does that mean if the law is producing sin, that the law is bad? Does that mean it's not perfect? Does that mean it's not helpful? And Romans 7 tries to help us sort through all of these questions to properly understand what is the law, what does it do, what does it not do, and what do we need to grow spiritually? Do we need the law? Do we need more law? Do we need less law? What do we need in our lives to grow spiritually? And this is a very, I think, fitting question because many Christians don't know what to do with the Old Testament law. Many Christians don't know what to do with rules in general. Should I try to get as few of them as possible in my life? Should I try to get as many of them as possible in my life? And Romans 7 seeks to answer this. And we saw in Romans 6 that we're actually dead to sin. And we're going to see in Romans 7 that we are actually dead to the law. So let's pick it up. I have 2 basic points this morning, then communion. We were doomed by the law, and now we as Christians are dead to the law. We were doomed, now we are dead to the law. So let's pick it up here in Romans 7, and we'll start in verse 7. But before we hit it, a little bit about the law. When I say law, I want to define the term. I am talking about what is known as the book of the law, or the Mosaic law, or generically speaking, the law. There are lots of laws or commandments that are in the book of the law. That's the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis through Deuteronomy. You could call it the Pentateuch. You could also call it the book of the law. Deuteronomy is actually second law. It's the law being reiterated again, but you find the law twice over inside of those 5 books. This is why Joshua, after Moses, would write and say, "This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night." What does he mean, the book of the law that we need to meditate in? Well, it means the first 5 books of the Bible. He's not talking about Psalms. He's not talking about Matthew's gospel. Those weren't written yet. He's talking about those first 5 books. That's the Mosaic law or the law. Inside of the law are the 10 laws that we know the best, the 10 commandments, that thou shalt have no other gods before me, and thou shalt not kill, and thou shalt not steal, all those things. But that is just part of a larger book of the law or the law. Some people try to take the book of the law and put it into 2 buckets. Bucket 1 being the ceremonial law. Here's wash your hands, here's what to wear, here's how to build the tabernacle, here's the sacrificial system. And then bucket 2, the moral law. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery. There's a smidge of wisdom in doing that, but really that's not a distinction that the Bible will make. And when we talk about the law in Romans, whether you think of it ceremonially or morally, it all combines to make one big book of the law. And we're talking about all of that when we say law. And you have to always remember that the law does many things. Some would be productive or positive. Some would be negative. But on the productive side, the law, first of all, instructs us about who God is. It teaches us about God, the lawgiver. The law came from God to Moses to the people. So the law in its origin is from a perfect source from God. And if you want to know something about someone, see if they've ever made a law. You can tell a lot about the Congress in the laws that a Congress makes. You can tell a lot about a king by the law that a king makes, and you can tell a lot about God by the laws that he makes. So when God says don't commit adultery, that would mean God likes faithful relationships. When God says don't steal, don't covet, it means God wants us to be content with the things that we have in our life. When God says forgive, that means he's about forgiveness. He's about grace in our relationships, and that's kind of his deal. All of these things teach you about God. Even the ceremonial, do the sacrifices this way, and do the temple this way, or build the tabernacle this way, and use these particular materials. It teaches you that God is a God of order. All these things can teach you about who God is, but Paul will say in Romans 7 that the law basically does some negative things in us. That this good thing that is law, God's law, actually works against us in many ways. And what he's going to say in verse number 7 is that the law exposes sin. Paul says, what shall we say then? Is the law sin? No, the law's not bad. The law's not sin. But I had not known sin, but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. So what he's saying is what I think we would know. The law names your bad behavior. The law gives category to what you are doing that is wrong. The law shows you what is wrong. It doesn't treat you, but it shows you. It's like an MRI. It reveals the problem, but it will not heal you. It'll diagnose you, but it won't heal you. But it does reveal where you've gone wrong. Paul uses coveting as something that got him. That, man, I would have not known that this was a problem in my life. He will say later on, my sin became exceedingly sinful. I realized this was a huge problem in my life when the law said, thou shalt not covet. Covet is one of the 10 commandments. We're not supposed to do it. But it's one of the few that involve the internal man. Much of the law is external. We can know if you killed somebody or not. That's something you did. We can know if you stole or not. That was an action. Coveting is more of an attitude. It produces actions, but the real root of it is an attitude. It's the opposite of being content with what you have. And Paul says the guy who was the Pharisee of Pharisees, the one who tried to externally observe the law as much as he possibly could, this guy said, when the law said don't covet and it looked on the inside, it put a spotlight on me and I realized, oh man, I have a problem. This thing that only me and God can see that's on the inside, my covetous nature, it is there, and it's there in a profound way, and I am a sinful person. The law gave category or named or revealed or exposed my sin. But what he wants to drive home, I think more specifically, is that the law stimulates sin. This good, perfect, holy law from God actually aggravates our sin nature, arouses sin in us, and produces or manifests sin in our life that would not be there if the law wasn't there. The law dominoes into sin. Here's how he says it in verse number 8. Sin, taking occasion by the commandment. Sin had an opportunity in my life. A window was opened for sin by the commandment. This sin wrought in me all manner of concupiscence. That is an old English way of saying all kinds of lusts. There were all kinds of malformed desires to do things or not do things that were wrong and insidious that come out of me because the commandment is producing this desire and in turn this sin. For without the law, sin was dead. Verse 9, I was alive without the law once. I was still in the hunt, I was still in the race. I thought that maybe I could morally earn my way with God. But when the commandment came, sin revived, I died. See the progression? Commandment comes, sin revives, I die. Commandment, law, sin, death. That is the progression that is being produced in Paul. Verse 10, the commandment which was ordained to life, I found to be unto death. Now more to come on unto life in a minute. But what he's saying is that the commandment was meant for life. The commandment was meant for human flourishing. It was meant to help us have healthy relationships and healthy bodies and to have a healthy relationship even with God, that this was produced for good. It was ordained to life, but it's not producing life in me. It's producing sin, and sin is bringing forth death inside of me. This is why Joshua can say that this book of the law that we meditate therein day and night, what happens when we do that? Well, then you'll make your way prosperous, and then you shall have good success, Joshua 1:8. Well, which is it? Is the law producing death in me, or is the law something that I meditate in and makes my way prosperous, and thou shalt have good success? Well, the commandment is ordained unto life. It is profitable. It is good, yet it produces death inside of us. Verse 11, for sin, taking occasion by the commandment, same phrase, deceived me, and by it slew me. So here's what he's saying. The law of thou shalt not, produces in me sin. More sin than I would have had without it even. It not only reveals that I'm exceedingly sinful and I become acutely aware that I'm guilty, it also produces sin in me. So if you think about this, you'll understand it, because all of us have a sin nature. Like, you're born that way. You are wired or bent to do wrong stuff. You just are. And parents have to work very hard to teach their children righteousness or the right way to act or the right way to respond. We do not have to teach them the wrong ways, because the wrong ways are instinctive. They're natural to us. The child will naturally be selfish. The child will naturally lie. You will have to teach the child to tell the truth. The child will naturally disobey. The child will naturally be violent when they don't get their way or their toy, and hit or hurt the kid in the nursery or their sibling. That will happen. You say, no, not my little angel. Yes, your little devil. That's the one. Right? There's a little terrorist inside every single one of us. And we have this rebellious nature, this sin nature, that doesn't like being told what to do. We don't like that. And so when we see a commandment that says, thou shalt not, we internally say, well, I shalt. Like, no one tells me what to do. You're not the boss of me. We don't want the law to have that authority over us and to be able to boss us around. So it exacerbates our rebellious nature. For some people, this is very overt, and you can see it all over them and all over their life. And for other people, this is a little more covert, but nevertheless, it happens in all of us. And so you can see this in simple things like keep off the lawn. And it's like, well, I didn't want to get on your lawn until I saw the sign, right? Or don't touch wet paint. I didn't want to touch it until I saw the sign that said don't touch. Now I do want to touch it. Or even with your children. If when your children are little, you can play the reverse psychology game with them. If you're eating dinner and they have fruit or vegetables or whatever it is they don't want to eat on their plate, and you look at them and say, eat it, no, eat it, eat it, I don't want to, I'm not gonna, and then you say, don't you dare eat your carrot. What happens in that little 3-year-old? When you say, don't you eat it, they'll start to eat it, won't they? Now, why does that work? And by the way, that's a bad idea to do. Like, it only works short term. Long term, you're just teaching them to disobey you. But it does work in the short term. Why? Because there's a rebellious nature that rejects or bristles against law. My children love to play a game on our swing set. It's their favorite game called Come Here, Go Away. I don't know where it started, how it started. I just know that it did. And of course, the swing, if I'm standing there pushing them, maybe I'm in front of the swing, they are either going away or they're coming here. That's what they do. They swing, go away, come here. And I will take them, I'll push them, I'll say, go away. And they will go away, and then they'll come back. And as they come back, they'll get giddy, and they'll laugh. And they'll, ha, ha, ha. I said, go away, and I'll push them away, and then they'll come right. I said, go away from me. And the fact that they're doing the opposite of what I'm telling them to do, even though they're doing both, they think they're doing the opposite, and they just think it's hilarious. They love it. And then we'll reverse it. I'll say, come here. And then they will come, but then they'll start to go away, and they'll laugh when they start to go away. And it's inside of them, and you, and me, to not want to do what we're told, to reject the law. So there's this sense where the law aggravates our sin nature and produces more sin or rebellion in us. But more than that, probably, there's also the sense in which we become guilty and we just stop trying because we feel like it's hopeless. I don't know if you've ever been in a class where you got to the end of the semester and you knew, I'm failing this class. Like, the final is this week. And it doesn't matter what I get on this final. I can get 100% on this final. I'm still failing the class. I got like a 60 even with 100% on my final, right? Now you tell me, if you know you're failing, there's no way around it, you're going to fail. How hard do you study for your final exam that week? Not very. You may not even show up for it, right? Because it's like, I'm failing. There's nothing I can do at this point. The ship has sailed, and F is in my future, so why try? And when people start to properly understand the law and see what God expects and requires of us, and they see how holy God is and how holy his law is, but how not holy they are, and all of a sudden they begin to understand what Romans 3 says, that we are guilty before God and that there is no way around it. You are not going to do enough good deeds to earn credit with God, right standing with God, make God your debtor, earn a place in heaven for yourself. You can't do it. You have failed the good test. If you are perfect from this day forward, you fail the good test. It produces in many people this, I'm going to throw my hands up, and now I will be exceedingly sinful, because who cares then? I'm not even going to try to live a moral life. I'm not even going to try to follow the rules. And the law begins to produce this in us. Augustine tells of this in his Confessions, where he writes about this time where he broke into an orchard and stole some pears. He was a young man, and in adult life, he reflected on it, and he said, why did I do that? He said, I remember that day. First of all, I wasn't hungry. I'd just eaten. I wasn't hungry one bit. And second of all, I don't even like pears. They're nasty to me. Why would I break in and steal pears if I'm not hungry and don't like pears? I fed them to the pigs. And you know what he came up with? It's because it was forbidden. Forbidden fruits are the sweetest. All I wanted to do was break the rule. That's what was tantalizing. That was what was exciting. So the law does this to us. The law oftentimes makes us throw up our hands and just say, I give up. This happens a lot of time, I feel, in churches with people's generosity. And I'd be the first to admit that I've had this mindset myself in years past for my own personal generosity, and maybe even portrayed it at times this way. But there is a law in the Old Testament that the Jewish people were expected to tithe. It was a law. Now, a tithe is 10%. There was also a principle that they should honor God with the first fruits of all their increase, which is a bit more broad, but the tithe was very specific. There's even an account in Malachi where God's mad at them because they broke the law. And he tells them, like, you're a God robber. You robbed me. And they say, where did we rob you? And he says, tithes, offerings. You didn't give me what the law said that you should give me. So there's this line of demarcation at a tithe and 10% that, for sure, in the Old Testament, if you gave 10%, you passed the test. Well done. You're no longer a God robber when it comes to your tithe. But if you gave 9.5%, you failed. You didn't hit the line, right? And what happened then, and what happens in many people now, if the principle of tithing, which is a principle that I would recommend, support, tell you to adopt. It's a great place for a Christian to kind of aim for in the early stages of their generosity to get to. But when that law that we actually are dead to and freed from, which we'll see in a minute, is presented in the same way now as it was in the Old Testament as this binding law, a line of demarcation, what happens for many people is, first of all, Christians get scared when pastors talk like this, and they start to think like, well, I give, I'm generous. All these other people are going to think they don't have to be generous, and like the ministry won't be funded, and missionaries won't be supported, and there won't be any money. And it's like, no, it's the opposite. If the line's 10%, okay, then you have on one hand people that hit 10%, and generally are like, I'm good, and may not ever consider God may want me to give more than 10%. Or there's people that feel like they can't hit 10%, and so they just don't even try. It's like, well, I could do, I feel like 6% would be an act of faith, But if I'm not hitting 10, I'm on God's curse list, so why even give 6? 0 and 9.9 are the same, so I'll go 0 and get a pool in the backyard, right? That's a natural way to think when it's just this law. And people, even pastors, will take that and be like, look, God's going to get you. He's going to get his 10% one way or the other. You better give it to him now, or he's going to take it out of your pocketbook later, and he'll make your oven break, and he'll make your car break, and he'll do whatever else, and he'll be on his curse list. And it's this pastors or people wanting people to give 10% out of fear and never considering, this is one window into what the text is going to tell us, that God's a lot more concerned about getting 100% out of love than he is 10% out of fear. That law does not apply to us in the same way that it did for an Old Testament Jewish person. That is different for us now, and God is far more like, I just want you to give me everything. Like, I want you to open up your entire life and say, it is all yours, and I'll tell you what level of generosity I want, and act by faith, and follow me. And that may end up being 20%. That may end up being 50%. I know a handful of Christians that reverse tithe. I don't know if you've ever heard of reverse tithe. If you want a challenge, you can adopt this one. You can make it yours today. It's where you live off of 10% and give away 90%. Now, to be honest, your income level has to be pretty high to be able to do that. That's probably not for most of us. But I know some Christians that do that because they've understood it's not this just line, 10% I'm good, 9.9% I'm bad, the end, that's the law. But it's far different for a Christian in that we are dead to the law, but we are alive to God through the Spirit of Jesus. So more to come on that. But the point is that if there's this line and you feel like you can't hit it, you just stop trying. And that the law does this to us and makes us guilty, and we feel like I can't measure up, I'm going to fail the good test. And so many times people just stop trying. And it produces more sin in their life. And that leads to a natural question of, if the law reveals my sin, and if the law aggravates my sin, or somehow produces more sin in me, then is the law even good? Should we just get rid of it? Is the law sin? Is the law bad? And this is verse number 12, where Paul clearly says, no, the law is not sin. Wherefore, the law is holy, and the commandment holy, and just, and good. Was then that which is good made unto me death? So, okay. So it's good, but it produces sin, and sin produces death. Does that mean the law is death? No. The law was ordained to life. Here's what he says. God forbid, no way. Sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me. So sin's what produces death. The law doesn't produce death. Sin does. It works death in me by that which is good, that sin, by the commandment, might become exceedingly sinful. Let me tell you very simply what he said. It is not that the law is bad. It's that we're bad. It's not that the law is broke. It's that we're broke. It's not that the law is a problem. We're the problem. That's what he's saying. Make no bones about it. The law's fine. The law's perfect, holy, just, good. We are not. And that holy, just, good thing inflames our rebellious nature and actually produces more sin in us. And here's where people are generally left. Most Christians at this point think there's two options, and there's not. There's a third option that we're going to see in a minute. But they think option one, well, I just read verse 8, verse 9, verse 10, and they'll cherry pick the Bible and say, it said that the law produced sin and that it exacerbates our sin. All these rules actually produce more rebellious people more often than not, which, by the way, parents, is a great lesson. Like in your own home, if you're trying to produce children who love the Lord and want to live righteous lives, the solution to that is not an abundance of rules. That's not the way to get kids who love the Lord. It's just rules upon rules upon rules upon rules, because that actually will inflame their rebellious nature. And it's not to say no rules either, though. So the people who look at the 8, 9, 10, 11 say, look, the law produces bad in me, so let's go no law. Let's go no rules. That's what we should do. Theologically, this is known as antinomianism, that anti-no, noma, law, no law. Let's have no law, no rules. That will be the solution for society. That will be the solution for churches. That'll be the solution for families. Let's just get rid of all of the rules and say, do your best. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's no line of demarcation anymore. There's just no law. Well, that doesn't work. It doesn't work in society if you're like, let's just decriminalize every law that's been on the books and get rid of it, right? And that's a little bit in vogue right now in our culture of like, hey, there's this law and people really struggle to obey it, so let's just like change the law or get rid of it, right? Everyone speeds at 70 miles an hour, so let's just make it 100 miles an hour. No, that doesn't work. More people die that way, right? And, well, everyone keeps doing drugs and assault. Is that really? Let's just get rid of the misdemeanors. That doesn't produce fruit in a society. That's a bad solution to say law produces sin, so let's get rid of all the law. That's imbalanced. It's also a bad solution to say, okay, let me cherry pick it and let me take verse 12. The law is holy. The commandment is holy and just and good. Don't you want more holiness in your life? Don't you want more goodness and justice in your life? If that's what the law is, then you need more of that. Let's not have no rules. Let's have more rules. And there's a whole subsect of people who claim to be Christian, and whether they are or not, that's above my pay grade. I don't judge that. But they want to retain all of the Old Testament law. They want us to live by a kosher diet. They still want to observe all of the Jewish feasts and holidays and festivals and to say, this was the law, this was what we're supposed to do, so we still have to do this. That's not very common. More common are Christians who are like, no, we can't go no law. The law is good, holy, just, so let's have more law. We know that we don't have to offer sacrifices in a temple anymore. Jesus was our sacrifice, obviously. We know we don't need priests to represent us in all the priestly garments anymore. Jesus is our high priest, obviously. We don't have all of those laws that we have to abide by, so let's just make more laws and new laws. Let's create our own set of rules. And this is very common because you feel like I have to do one or the other. I have to go no rules or more rules. And so if you grew up in holiness movement, maybe a Pentecostal background, if you grew up in a Baptist background that was touted to be kind of a separatist movement or maybe a fundamentalist movement, then you probably had this, where it was like, okay, these laws that the priests have to wear this, yeah, those don't apply anymore, but we have new laws on what the women have to wear, this, right? And those rules are endless that people have come up with. Some of them I grew up with, some I didn't grow up with. You know, women, you can't let your hair down. You have to keep it up in a bun. You can't wear makeup. You have to wear a skirt. Pants are no. Okay, pants are in, but you can't wear pants to church. That's definitely a no. If you do wear pants to church, your shirt, you have to mind that too. The two-finger rule, right? Anyone have the two-finger rule? Come on. All right. You're identifying yourself, right? If you don't know what it is, clavicle, 2 fingers, that's where your shirt has to come to. 3 fingers, shirt's too low. Cleavage could happen. That's a bad idea. 3 fingers. If your fingers are chubbier, maybe 1.5 fingers. But that's the rule. And we've come up with all of these more rules because law is holy and good and just, and we need more rules. We don't have a kosher diet anymore. I rarely meet a Christian who's like, kosher diet, no bacon. Well, we'll create our own diet, right? We got a music diet. I grew up in a very music diet environment where it was like there were a lot of rules for our music diet. Basically, it was one big one that was like it has to explicitly mention God and honor God and be God-honoring music. That's the only music that's good, the end. And as a teenager, I'm like, what about like Yo-Yo Ma? Like if there's no lyrics and it's just instrumental, it never mentions God. Is that bad? When in doubt, leave it out. Yep, bad. Next. What about the Star-Spangled Banner? Like we sang it at the Christian school, like a basketball game, but I never mentioned God like at all. That song seems very secular. I think like the whole country knows it. Like that's not a Christian song. Well, it didn't mention God. It's bad. Francis Scott Key, instrument of the devil. You know, he's a bad guy. Like that was kind of how it worked, right? Francis, forgive me, Francis Scott Key was not the instrument of the devil. Drums were the instrument of the devil. That was actually what it was. And I don't know, you have questions. Like, where did this rule come from? Who said that? Like, well, if the drums give a beat, it makes you want to tap your toe, it makes you want to move your body. If it makes you want to move your body, then that's a bad thing. Where'd you read that? Like, I think God maybe taps his toes to music. Like, that's a bad thing? And ultimately, it comes from some guy who didn't have rhythm and didn't want everyone else to have rhythm, and he just, made a rule. But there's rules. And people love to have this environment that's black and white, clear-cut, everything white. Here's the line for everything. And you end up having a group of Christians that are like, no rules, and you end up having a group of Christians that are more rules, and ultimately what Romans is going to tell us is that the solution for our spiritual growth is not no rules, and it's not more rules. It's more relationship with Jesus. And it's not that the law was bad. Don't ever say that the law was bad. The law never did anything wrong. The law is holy. The law is good. It does serve a purpose. Yet, it is very limited in its purpose. Its purpose is not to make you a sanctified, growing spiritually Christian. It's never done that for anybody, ever. It will reveal your sin. It will exacerbate your sin. It will show you about the nature and character of God. But it will not make you a spiritually mature person. It won't do it. You taking the law and wanting to willpower your way to keep all of the laws and just be a moral person is a fool's errand. But there is a better way. And honestly, next week, and then through the course of July, we're going to talk about this better way in profound detail, but you're going to get a little snapshot, a little window into this better way that Paul's going to tell us about it in chapter 7, and then he's going to elaborate on it at length in chapter number 8. And here's the better way, that we actually are dead to the law. So go to verse number 1 of the same chapter. The reality that we as Christians are dead to the law is something that we have to know and show. Knowing it is easy. Showing it is hard. Here's verse number 1. Know that the law's power ends at death. Know ye not, brethren, for I speak to them that know the law, how that the law has dominion over a man as long as he liveth. Isn't that simple? You're not going to be audited after you die. It won't happen. If you drive 100 miles an hour down the road today, and you crash into a tree and you die, no one will give you a speeding ticket. No one will bring you up on charges for reckless endangerment. You know why? You dead. The law doesn't have any effect on you anymore. You're dead. That's something that we know. That's not a hard truth to wrap our heads around. He continues on, verse 2. The woman, he's going to use marriage and widows and widowers as an example. The woman which has a husband, she's bound by the law to her husband so long as he lives. But if the husband be dead, she's loose from the law of her husband. We understand this. I legally bind myself to my wife. We take a covenant till death do us part. We get a marriage license from the county courthouse. She's my wife, but if I die or she dies, now we are freed from that marriage and free, if we want, to go marry another person. Yeah? Once again, not hard. That's how it works. He's saying that death is producing this release from the law. Verse number 3. He's going to just say the same thing again, basically. So if then while her husband liveth, she be married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she's free from the law, so that she's no adulteress, though she be married to another man. Now, there's a lot I could say on marriage and divorce and adultery and all those sorts of things that really is beyond the point, main thrust of this text. The main point that he's trying to communicate is we know how it works. The law is no longer binding when death occurs. Simple. We know this. But then he's going to say Christians need to show this in our relationship to the book of the law. We now show this. Verse number 4. Wherefore, my brethren, ye also are become dead to the law by the body of Christ, that ye should be married to another, even to him who's raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. And what a beautiful verse that is. We now are dead to the law because we are dead. What he's echoing is what was profoundly stated in Romans chapter number 6, if you remember that sermon 2 weeks ago. That when Jesus dies and buries and raises from the dead, we unite with him when we put our faith and trust in him, and we identify with him, and now his death is our death, and his burial is our burial, and his resurrection is our resurrection. So we can say with Jesus, I am dead to my sin and now dead to the law. We can say my old man is buried and gone, and now a new man is raised with Jesus to walk in newness of life, to have a new nature and new desires and a new way of operating, and now I'm dead to sin, yes. I don't have to be drugged around by my sin and be a carnal Christian, but I'm also dead to the law through the body of Christ, through my identification with the death of Jesus. Verse 5, when we were in the flesh, the motions of sins, which were by the law, did work in our members to bring forth fruit unto death. He just described the domino effect. When we were in the flesh, sin, motions of sins, which were by the law produced the motions of sins, those did work in our members to bring forth fruit unto death. Law, sin, death. Verse number 6, last verse. But we are now delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in oldness of letter. And that phrase that we serve in a new spirit and not in oldness of letter is literally the one little terse phrase that describes pretty much all of chapter number 8 that he's going to elaborate on. And here's what he's saying. Simply put, he is describing a woman who's in a marriage, and she's married to Mr. Law. Now, this marriage, at face value, seems like it's a good marriage. Because Mr. Law's perfect. He never makes a mistake. He never does anything morally wrong. He never has to ask for forgiveness. He is a perfect husband. How many of you are like, sign me up for the perfect husband package? Like, that sounds fantastic. Here's the problem with being married to Mr. Law. Mr. Law, albeit he's perfect, he is rigid, and he is demanding, and he has some high expectations that he puts out there very plainly. He tells her how she should look. He tells her what she should do. He tells her how she should cook. He tells her how she should clean. And when she falls short, she wants to please him. He's a perfect man. She wants to have a good marriage. But try as she may, day after day after day, she fails to meet his expectations. And when she fails to meet his expectations, he is not gracious. He is not kind. He is not forgiving. He shows it to her. He reveals it to her. He tells her over and over and over again how she's falling short, and she's falling short, and she's not measuring up. And she's not perfect like he is, over and over and over again. And wouldn't you know it, it only takes a little bit of time before being married to Mr. Law is a drag. As perfect as he is, it ain't fun. And she wants out of the marriage. But she realizes, I'm bound to him by marriage. The only way out of this is death. And shucks, he ain't dying soon. Jesus said that not one jot, one tittle would pass from the law. Like, he's perfect. He ain't dying. So the only way out of this is for her to die. I don't want to die. And here's what Jesus said. We not only know that we can be released by death, but we show it. That we as Christians are married to Mr. Law, but we do die. We identify with the death of Jesus, and we are released from this marriage. We are dead to the law. We are freed from the law, but we don't stay dead. We are raised to newness of life in Jesus, and now we're not single. We're not widowed or a widower. It's not that there's no marriage. Now, if you caught it, we are now married to a new one, him who was resurrected from the dead. We have a new marriage. Now we're married to Mr. Love. I'm dead in Jesus, and I'm raised, and now I have a new marriage where I'm not married to Mr. Law, I'm married to Mr. Love. And Mr. Love, oh man, he's kind, and he is gracious, The environment in the home is not one of legalities. The environment in the home is one of graciousness. He is patient. He is slow to anger. But here's the thing. Mr. Love actually has higher expectations than Mr. Law. The law said go 1 mile. Mr. Love said go 2 miles. Mr. Law said eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Mr. Love said love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Pray for them that despitefully use you. The law said don't commit adultery. Mr. Love said if you commit adultery in your heart, you've committed adultery already. You say, oh, did I upgrade? Absolutely. Because the difference between Mr. Law and Mr. Love is not only that Mr. Love has compassion and tender mercies and grace. Mr. Law never lifts a finger to help. But Mr. Love says, I'll help you. I'll get up under the burden with you. I'll model it for you. I'll give you my spirit. I'll give you my resources. Yes, there is a higher expectation, but there is grace upon grace upon grace for when you fall short. And this marriage is the real deal. I'm committed to you. I'm devoted to you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to forsake you. I'm not going to abuse you. I'm not going to malign you. I'm not going to look down on you. I'm going to have compassionate grace and mercy, and I will help you do what is the best that could possibly be done. I will actually take the law, I'll upgrade it in many ways, and it's ordained to life. I'll produce life in you if you be married to me. And here's the deal. The whole point is that if you want to produce real, genuine spiritual growth in your life, you cannot still be married to Mr. Law. And there are a ton of Christians that are still married to Mr. Law. You have to be married to Mr. Love. The solution is not no rules, and the solution is not more rules. The solution is more relationship. More relationship with Jesus in loving him and wanting to honor him and enjoying his environment of grace. That is the solution. Now, more to come next week at the end of Romans 7, where Paul says, let me just be clear, here's one more way that's not going to work. It's a profound, honestly, it's one of the most vulnerable texts in all of the Bible outside of the Psalms. It's unbelievably transparent and vulnerable, and I can't wait to hit it with you next week. But we'll understand a bit more fully what does not work. And then we're going to understand in a much more profound way in Romans 8 what does work. What does this mean that I'm married to Mr. Love? That I got a new husband, that I got new desires, that I got a new nature, that I have a new spirit, that I have a new way, that I have a new fruitfulness. What does this mean when he says that? We'll unpack that piece by piece by piece. But for today, may we enjoy, celebrate, remember, honor, even as we take communion, have a renewing of vows of sorts that is us remembering that we're not married to Mr. Law anymore, we're married to Mr. Love.